Many years ago, when anti-Israel activist George Galloway, in your student days, refused to debate you because you're Israeli, or maybe he was just intimidated. But now you've had quite the start as your recent position as Israel's government spokesman has unfolded since the beginning of the war. Share with us, if you will, some insights into your experience and maybe some of the challenges you faced since the war began.
Yeah, I hope I finally lived down that moment, getting walked out on by George Galloway as my claim to fame. You know, it's extraordinary looking back. You mentioned my student years as an activist for Israel on campus. In my final year at Oxford 10 years ago, a motion came up to align the student union with BDS, and we were able to defeat it by a margin of, I think, 6 or 7 to 1. Which is not a feat that could be replicated nowadays with the campus atmosphere having been poisoned so badly against Israel. When you look at the figures from the United States and the number of campus-age Americans who support Hamas openly, the situation is very disturbing. It has been a roller coaster 3 months. It's been a roller coaster 3 months because we have all found ourselves shoved in the eye of the storm. October 7th happened, and everyone suddenly jumped into action and did whatever they could. Some people started cooking for soldiers or driving socks down to military bases. I set up a little mini studio at home and started giving interviews as a former presidential advisor. And then about a week later, found myself getting roped into the National Public Diplomacy Directorate in the Prime Minister's office and going on air the following day as an official spokesman. Now it's been about 250 interviews later in the international media, well over 50 daily press conferences as well, and other briefings that I've done with groups. And we face a number of challenges. At the moment, we are seeing that international interest in this conflict has gone down dramatically. If at the peak, sometimes we were able to do 12 interviews a day and working ourselves to exhaustion, that's gone down dramatically. But the amount that's being taken up by the hostile coverage has gone up. So there's less coverage, but it's more hostile. And that's because memories of the atrocities of October 7th are receding, despite some very impressive investigative pieces, most notably by the New York Times, about the atrocities of October 7th. CNN has been absolutely solid in covering them as well. And it's a fight. It's a fight to do 3 things. First of all, remind people of what happened on October 7th, that this wasn't some esoteric event that happened 3 months ago. This was the opening shot of a war that Hamas declared and launched with an invasion on October 7th. It's not something that gives us legitimacy for a war. It's the reason there is a war. The second is to keep talking about the hostages and the new revelations that come in from the survivors of what is going on in the Hamas terror dungeons are absolutely chilling, and we have to keep that front and foremost on everyone's minds, because some people will give into the illusion to think, okay, Israelis, you had your fun. When is enough enough? When we get all the hostages back? And the third and the most challenging thing is to explain that the extent of the devastation that we are seeing in Gaza and the genuine human suffering has an address, and that address is Hamas and the human shield strategy that seeks to deliberately maximize civilian casualties in a sick ploy to gain international sympathy and then diplomatic pressure on Israel to back off. And I think it's very difficult for people around the world to appreciate the extent of how Hamas deliberately embedded itself under civilian areas to protect Gaza underground with Gaza overground. I saw the New York Times report that the tunnels might be 350 to 450 miles long. I mean, that's 55 to 70% longer than the London Underground. And that is the reason. That is the reason for the suffering we are seeing. And of course, this can all end tomorrow if Hamas surrenders now. And that is a demand that many world leaders are in fact making. And I think that is a not inconsiderable achievement for Israel's public diplomacy over 3 months into the war.
Absolutely. And a message that everybody should be echoing. That's how you end the war, for Hamas to surrender. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's why I speak of the rallies in London as being pro-Hamas marches. Because, look, everyone except for the most violent extremists wants this war to be over. Okay, the question is on what terms? And if you're going out in the streets and chanting ceasefire now, you're saying end it now with the hostages still in Gaza and Hamas in power. Whereas if you really cared about civilians, you should be demanding surrender now. Lay down your arms, hand over your pedophile rapists for a war crimes tribunal, and give back the hostages.